She was struck by 13 bombs and kamikazes. The Imperial Japanese Navy announced her destruction 3 separate times. And yet, when the guns finally fell silent in August 1945, she remained afloat, the most decorated warship in the history of the United States Navy. This is the story of USS Enterprise CV-6, the ship they called the Gray Ghost. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 7, 1941, as waves of Japanese aircraft prepared to devastate Pearl Harbor, America's most celebrated warship was steaming toward the same destination. USS Enterprise, flagship of Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey's Task Force 8, had been scheduled to arrive in port the previous day. A storm had delayed her, bad weather that had damaged an escorting destroyer and forced the task force to reduce speed. That storm would prove to be the first of many miracles. At 6:15 that Sunday morning, Enterprise launched 18 SBD, Dauntless dive bombers, on a routine patrol. The pilots had no reason to expect anything unusual. They were simply flying ahead to scout the carrier's path, then landing at Ford Island to begin their shore leave. None of them knew that at that exact moment, 250 miles to the northwest, Japanese carriers were launching the first wave of an attack that would plunge America into war. What happened next would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The Enterprise pilots arrived over Oahu to find paradise in flames. Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson initially mistook the columns of smoke for burning sugarcane, a common sight in Hawaii. Then he saw the rising sun insignia on green aircraft streaking past him. The radio silence that Enterprise had maintained suddenly exploded with desperate transmissions. "Please don't shoot!" Ensign Manuel Gonzalez called into his radio as anti-aircraft fire erupted from every direction. "We are American aircraft!" His was the last transmission anyone heard from him. His plane was never found. 7 dive bombers were shot down that morning, some by Japanese Zeros, others by terrified American gunners who fired at anything in the sky. 8 Enterprise airmen died in the confused maelstrom above Pearl Harbor, becoming among the first American casualties of the Pacific War. But the worst was yet to come. When night fell on December 7th, Enterprise launched 6 F-4F Wildcat fighters to search for the Japanese fleet. Finding nothing, the pilots were ordered to land at Ford Island's darkened airfield. What followed was a tragedy born of terror. As the Wildcats approached Oahu, every gun in Pearl Harbor opened fire. One witness recalled that you could read a newspaper by the light of the tracers. 3 pilots died in minutes, shot down by their own countrymen. Ensign Herbert Menges crashed into a hotel and became the first Navy fighter pilot killed in the war. Lieutenant Eric Allen bailed out only to be struck by .50 caliber fire while descending in his parachute. Only Ensign James Daniels survived, threading his fighter down a blacked-out channel, narrowly missing the beached battleship Nevada, and landing at such speed his flaps barely deployed. As he taxied toward the control tower, a sailor opened fire on his plane. Another pilot who had just survived his own crash grabbed a rifle and knocked the gunner unconscious with the butt, saving Daniels' life. James Daniels would go on to fly 110 combat missions across 2 wars. He would become the only American pilot present at both Pearl Harbor and the Japanese surrender ceremony. But on that night, he was simply a young man who had escaped death by the narrowest of margins. The next evening, Enterprise crept into Pearl Harbor to refuel. Her crew saw the devastation firsthand: capsized battleships, burning oil slicks, the smell of death hanging over the water. Angry voices called out from the darkness, "Where the hell were you?" Vice Admiral Halsey ordered every able-bodied man to help load supplies. The normal 24-hour refueling process was completed in 7 hours. By dawn on December 9th, Enterprise was back at sea, hunting. On December 10th, her aircraft found and sank the Japanese submarine I-70, the first full-sized enemy warship destroyed by American forces after the declaration of war. The legend of the Big E had begun. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers delivered intelligence that would set the stage for the most decisive naval battle in history. The Japanese combined fleet was moving toward Midway Atoll with 4 aircraft carriers, the same carriers that had devastated Pearl Harbor. Enterprise and her sister carrier Hornet steamed to intercept them, joined by the damaged Yorktown, hastily patched together at Pearl Harbor in just 3 days. Against Japan's 4 carriers, 18 battleships, and 250 combat aircraft, the Americans had 3 carriers, no battleships, and 233 planes. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Enterprise launched everything she had. What followed was chaos. American torpedo squadrons found the Japanese fleet first and attacked without fighter cover. The slaughter was absolute. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay led Torpedo Squadron 6's 14 devastators against the carrier Kaga. 10 were shot down in minutes. 20 men died, including Lindsay himself. Not a single torpedo found its target. But the torpedo bomber's sacrifice served a crucial purpose. They drew the Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level, leaving the skies above unguarded. At 20,000 feet, Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky led Enterprise's 33 dive bombers toward the expected intercept point and found empty ocean. With fuel running dangerously low, McClusky faced a decision that would determine the fate of the Pacific War. He could turn back or he could gamble. He gambled. McClusky led his squadron northwest, searching desperately for any sign of the enemy. At 9:47 a.m., he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing toward the northeast at full speed. Correctly guessing it was rejoining the main fleet, he followed its wake directly to the Japanese carriers. What McClusky and his pilots saw from above was a gift from fate. 4 carriers with their flight decks packed with aircraft bombs and torpedoes being readied for a strike against the American fleet. The Japanese had no idea death was diving toward them from 4 miles above. Lieutenant Dick Best led Bombing Squadron 6 into the attack. In the confusion of the moment, all 34 dive bombers initially aimed for the carrier Kaga. Best saw the error, pulled out of his dive, and with only 2 wingmen, attacked the carrier Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship. Best released his 1,000-pound bomb from 2,500 feet. It punched through Akagi's flight deck and exploded in the upper hangar, where 18 armed aircraft sat fueled and ready. The carrier was doomed. In the space of 5 minutes, from 10:22 to 10:26 a.m., Enterprise dive bombers destroyed 2 fleet carriers. A mixed squadron would sink a 3rd, Hiryu, that afternoon. Dick Best became the only pilot in the battle to score direct hits on 2 enemy carriers in a single day. But Best's heroism came at a terrible price. During his dives, he inhaled caustic fumes from a faulty oxygen canister. The fumes activated latent tuberculosis. After surviving one of the most decisive moments in naval history, Richard Best was medically retired from the Navy, his flying days over at age 22. Midway broke the back of Japanese naval aviation. The 4 carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor were gone, along with hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots. Admiral Nimitz later said that McClusky's decision to continue the search decided the fate of our carrier task force and our forces at Midway. Enterprise emerged from the battle undamaged, but her luck would not hold forever. 2 months after Midway, Enterprise steamed into the waters around Guadalcanal to support the first American ground offensive of the war. On August 24, 1942, Japanese forces launched a massive counterattack. At 5:12 p.m., more than 30 Japanese dive bombers broke through Enterprise's defensive screen. What followed was the most intense 5 minutes in the carrier's history. The first bomb pierced the flight deck and detonated deep within the ship, killing dozens of sailors in the compartments below. The second struck near the aft elevator. The explosion ignited ready ammunition from a 5-inch gun mount, instantly killing 35 members of the gun crew and turning that section of the ship into an inferno. In 4 minutes, Enterprise was hit 3 times and near-missed 4 more. 74 men were dead. 95 more lay wounded. A 74-foot section of her flight deck had been torn open. Fires raged through multiple decks, but Enterprise refused to die. Her damage control parties, including 75 Seabees from the construction battalion who happened to be aboard, fought the blazes with desperate determination. They passed fire hoses through bomb holes in the deck, extinguished burning compartments, and rescued wounded sailors from smoke-filled passages. Within hours, Enterprise had recovered her aircraft and was steaming back to Pearl Harbor under her own power. She returned to battle just in time for the worst moment of the Pacific War. On October 26, 1942, Enterprise faced the Japanese again at the Battle of Santa Cruz. By then, the strategic situation was desperate. Of the 7 fleet carriers the United States had possessed at the start of the war, only 2 remained operational, Enterprise and Hornet. That morning, Enterprise scout planes found the Japanese carriers first. But before the American strike could do decisive damage, Japanese aircraft found the American fleet. Enterprise briefly hid in a rain squall while 22 dive bombers and 18 torpedo bombers savaged Hornet. When she emerged, the Japanese turned on her. Between 11:15 and 11:20 a.m., 24 dive bombers attacked. The first bomb pierced the flight deck and exploded outside the hull, peppering the ship with 160 fragment holes. The second was worse, far worse. The bomb struck the flight deck, passed through multiple decks, and detonated in the forward repair station. 40 men, the entire damage control party manning that section, died instantly. The engineer repair party was wiped out. In a single blast, Enterprise lost many of the men who kept her alive. 44 killed, 75 wounded. The forward elevator broken in half and jammed, yet Enterprise stayed in the fight. That afternoon, Hornet was abandoned, burning and listing. American destroyers fired torpedoes into her hull to prevent capture. When she finally sank, Enterprise became something she had never been before, the last operational American carrier in the Pacific Ocean. Her crew painted a sign on the flight deck that captured the desperate mathematics of that moment: Enterprise versus Japan. For the next 6 weeks, while Japan had 9 carriers operating in the Pacific, America had 1. And that one carrier was damaged, patched together with hasty repairs, her elevator still jammed, her hull leaking oil. Yet she fought on. In November, Enterprise sailed into the naval battle of Guadalcanal with welders still sparking on her decks and air hammers still pounding in her compartments. Construction crews worked alongside her sailors as she launched strikes that helped sink the battleship Hii, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war, and turned back the final Japanese attempt to retake Guadalcanal. The Gray Ghost had earned her nickname. Japan reported her sunk 3 times during these desperate months. Each time she returned to haunt them. The story of Enterprise cannot be told without the men who flew from her deck, pilots whose courage defined the meaning of sacrifice. Bruno Peter Guido was an aviation machinist's mate, not a pilot. On February 1, 1942, during Enterprise's first offensive raid against the Japanese-held Marshall Islands, a damaged enemy bomber attempted to crash into the carrier. Guido ran across the flight deck, leaped into a parked dive bomber, and opened fire with the rear machine gun. Witnesses described it as a personal duel, a young American sailor standing in an open cockpit, firing at an enemy pilot diving to kill them both. Guido's bullets found their mark. The bomber's wing clipped his aircraft, shearing off the tail 3 feet from where he stood, before crashing into the sea. Admiral Halsey promoted Guido on the spot, from third-class to first-class petty officer. 4 months later, Guido flew as a rear gunner at Midway. His aircraft was shot down after successfully bombing the carrier Kaga. He and his pilot, Ensign Franco Flaherty, were captured by a Japanese destroyer. After interrogation, both men were bound with ropes, tied to weighted fuel cans, and thrown overboard to drown. Bruno Guido was 22 years old. Lieutenant Stanley Swede Vectisa became a legend at Santa Cruz through an act of aerial heroism that has never been equaled. The night before the battle, Vectisa located Enterprise in the darkness by following an oil slick he had noticed seeping from the carrier earlier, a testament to both his observation skills and the ship's damaged condition. When Japanese torpedo bombers attacked Enterprise the next day, Vectisa found himself alone against 11 aircraft making their runs on the carrier. In a display of flying that defied belief, he shot down 5 torpedo planes, scattering the attack before they could launch their weapons. A 6th aircraft he damaged deliberately crashed into the destroyer Smith. His squadron commander wrote in Vectisa's flight log, "Greatest single combat fight record in the history of air warfare." He recommended Vectisa for the Medal of Honor. Admiral Kincaid, for reasons never explained, downgraded it to a Distinguished Flying Cross. Then there was Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient for shooting down 5 bombers while defending the carrier Lexington earlier in the war. In late 1943, O'Hare commanded Enterprise's air group and pioneered a new form of warfare, carrier-based night fighters. On November 26, 1943, O'Hare led a 3-plane team in the first American carrier night fighter mission. Using radar to guide fighters into visual range of enemy bombers, the team shot down 2 attacking aircraft in the darkness. But in the confusion that followed, with planes using running lights to regroup, O'Hare's Hellcat was hit. possibly by friendly fire drawn to his lights. His aircraft went into the water 26 miles from Enterprise. His body was never recovered. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport bears his name today. These men, and thousands like them, made Enterprise what she was. They created in her, as one historian wrote, a spirit which made her one of the most successful and beloved warships in history. By 1944, the tide had turned irrevocably against Japan. Enterprise, rebuilt and upgraded after months in dry dock, returned to a Pacific now dominated by American carrier task forces. But Japan had developed a new weapon, one that would test Enterprise's legendary resilience to its breaking point. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Enterprise pilots participated in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a one-sided slaughter in which American fighters destroyed 426 Japanese carrier aircraft in a single day. Enterprise emerged unscathed, contributing 19 confirmed kills and pioneering the night attack tactics that would define modern carrier warfare. 4 months later, at Leyte Gulf, Enterprise dive bombers scored 4 direct hits on the super battleship Musashi and helped doom the battleships Yamashiro and Fuso. It was the largest naval battle in history, and Enterprise was in the middle of it. But Japan had an answer to American supremacy: pilots willing to die. The kamikaze, Divine Wind, first appeared in large numbers at Leyte Gulf in October 1944. By the time Enterprise supported the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945, suicide attacks had become Japan's primary naval weapon. At Iwo Jima, Enterprise set a record that would never be broken in World War II. 174 continuous hours of air operations, more than 7 days without rest. Day and night, her aircraft flew defensive patrols over the Marines bleeding on the volcanic island below. On April 11, 1945, the kamikazes found her. 2 suicide aircraft dove on Enterprise that afternoon. Her gunners shot down one, the other crashed alongside the hull, its bomb detonating beneath the ship. The explosion wrenched her hull and wounded 18 sailors. Enterprise withdrew to Ulithi for 3 weeks of repairs. She returned to the fight. On May 14, 1945, a Zero fighter piloted by Lieutenant Shunsuke Tomiyasu approached Enterprise using cloud cover to mask his approach. At the last moment, just before crossing her stern, Tomiyasu executed a snap roll, inverting his aircraft and dove through her flight deck. The explosion that followed was catastrophic. Enterprise's 15-ton forward elevator rocketed 400 feet into the air. 14 men died. 68 more were wounded. The pilot's body was found in the bottom of the elevator well. Enterprise limped away from the combat zone on May 16, 1945, the last American carrier forced out of the war by kamikaze damage. She would never fight again. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Enterprise was undergoing repairs at Puget Sound Navy Yard. Her war was over. Her record was unmatched: 20 battle stars, more than any other ship in American history, 911 enemy aircraft destroyed, 71 ships sunk, participation in nearly every major action of the Pacific War. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal called her the one ship that most nearly symbolizes the history of the United States Navy in World War II. The British Royal Navy presented her with the Admiralty Pennant, an honor never before bestowed on any ship outside the Royal Navy in its 400-year history. On October 17, 1945, Enterprise anchored in New York Harbor for Navy Day celebrations. More than 250,000 visitors walked her decks. She rendered passing honors to President Truman. The nation celebrated its most famous warship. Then America forgot her. Enterprise was decommissioned on February 17, 1947, and placed in storage at Bayonne, New Jersey. There she sat, rusting for more than a decade. Several cities were offered the ship as a permanent memorial: New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. All declined, citing the estimated $125,000 annual maintenance cost. In 1954, former crew members formed the USS Enterprise Association. When the Navy announced it could no longer maintain the ship, the association launched a desperate campaign to save her. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz lent his name. Fleet Admiral William Halsey, Bull Halsey, Enterprise's old friend, championed the cause publicly. Schoolchildren across America donated their nickels and dimes. The association successfully passed a resolution through Congress to establish Enterprise as a national memorial in Washington, D.C. Victory seemed within reach. Then came the devastating condition. The association had just 6 months to raise $2 million. It was, as one historian wrote, too much in too short a time. For a nation eager to forget the terrible wars of the first half of the century, excited by the developing space race and not yet appreciative of the historic value of its wartime heroes, the sum was impossible. On July 1, 1958, USS Enterprise CV-6 was sold to the Lipset Corporation of New York City for $561,000, less than 3% of what she had cost to build. The scrapping began in September at Kearny, New Jersey. A German immigrant named W. Henry Hoffman oversaw the dismantling. Hoffman had served in the Kaiser's Navy during World War I, then immigrated to America and developed a deep love for his adopted nation. When workers reached Enterprise's stern, Hoffman recognized the 16-foot, 1-ton nameplate as something sacred. He saved it. Today, that stern plate, bearing the name Enterprise in bold letters, is the only significant piece of the Big E's hull that survives. It stands in New Jersey, awaiting transfer to the National Museum of the United States Navy, a monument to what was lost. The scrapping of Enterprise remains one of the great tragedies of American military heritage. As Rear Admiral Sam Cox, Director of Naval History and Heritage Command, wrote, "If any ship that served in World War II deserved to be preserved as a memorial to the valor and sacrifice of those Navy personnel who served in that war, it was the USS Enterprise." In the years after her destruction, other carriers were preserved: Intrepid, Yorktown, Hornet, Midway. The museum ship movement proved that preservation was viable. It simply came too late for Enterprise. Yet her legacy endures in ways her builders never imagined. Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, named his fictional starship after C-5V-6 because he was particularly fascinated by the story of the Enterprise in World War II and always considered it a heroic ship. That name has now spanned generations. Jack Taylor, a fighter pilot who flew Hellcats from Enterprise's deck in 1944, founded a car rental company after the war. In 1969, he renamed it Enterprise Rent-A-Car in honor of the ship he had served on. NASA named the Space Shuttle Enterprise in her honor, and the United States Navy has never let the name die. On February 4, 1958, just months before CV-6 was sold for scrap, the keel was laid for CV-65, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. She bore the name Enterprise, carried portholes from her predecessor in the captain's cabin, and served for 51 years until her own decommissioning in 2012. Now CVN-80, a Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier, is under construction. Steel from CVN-65 is being recycled into her hull. She will be commissioned in the 2030s as the 9th United States naval vessel to bear the name Enterprise. The Gray Ghost still haunts the seas. Enterprise's ship's bell resides at the United States Naval Academy, stationed before Bancroft Hall. It is rung only after victories over Army and during morning colors. Her anchor and commissioning plaque stand at the Washington Navy Yard. The 1938 commissioning flag surfaced in 1999 and is now preserved. But perhaps the truest memorial is found in the words of the men who served aboard her. Arthur Brown, a damage control petty officer who served from 1942 until war's end, was asked what it meant to sail on Enterprise. He answered, "I felt honored to be on that ship. The Japanese claim to have sunk us 6 times. After Santa Cruz, we were the only aircraft carrier in the Pacific for a while. It was like they were always after us." He paused. "You don't forget, it's there." Brown was the only Enterprise CV-6 veteran present at the decommissioning ceremony of CVN-65 in 2012, a living bridge between two ships that bore the same proud name. USS Enterprise CV-6 earned 20 battle stars. She survived 13 bomb and kamikaze hits. She fought at Pearl Harbor, Midway, Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. She stood alone against the Japanese Empire when no other American carrier remained. The Japanese announced her death 3 times, and 3 times she rose from the waves to fight again. The Gray Ghost was never defeated. She was simply forgotten. But those who know her story remember. And in the steel of the carrier now taking shape in Newport News, Virginia, in the name she will carry into the 22nd century, USS Enterprise lives on. She always will.